For better or worse, Damon Severson is going to be on the roster for the Columbus Blue Jackets next season. Let's talk about that on today's Locked On Blue Jackets.
You're Locked On Blue Jackets, your daily podcast on the Columbus Blue Jackets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, and welcome to Locked On Blue Jackets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I am, as always, your host, Jay Foster, here to give you the good, the bad, and the ugly about your favorite team and mine, the Columbus Blue Jackets. Before we get things started, I want to thank everyone for making this your first listen of the day every single day. Locked On Blue Jackets is free and available on all podcast platforms and over on YouTube. Like I said, we're going to talk about Damon Severson today, and this might not be a popular take, but I don't know that the Severson problem is as bad as we think it is. So we're going to get into that. We're going to get into his underlying stats. We're going to get into a little bit of like eye test versus perception stuff, all of that good stuff, right? So before we get into that, though, I do have to tell you that today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. So let's talk about Damon Severson, because he has been a frustrating player to watch for the Blue Jackets, I think. Some of it has been his fault. Some of it hasn't been his fault. I think he had some good moments this season. He had some poor moments this season, right? Kind of like every player does. Final stats, and if we look at just like the regular ones, not as bad as I thought. He's playing less this season than he did last season, which I think is a good thing. Last season, he had 28 points in 67 games and was a -10 in 21 average minutes of ice time. This season, he had 25 points in 70 games, was a +5, and played 2 minutes less. So contributed near enough the same if we, factor in the fact that he was playing less per game. Had a better on ice result as well. Plus minus is basically meaningless in the grand scheme of things, but improving that by 15 is definitely a sign of good things, right? And again, we'll get into kind of like the underlying stats as well and what that actually means. But typically, his stats aren't bad, right? And I think he's got a little bit of, I always call it Elvis Muslikin syndrome, right? Of he's being paid more than he's contributing, right? And, if Elvis was making 3 or 4 million a year, we wouldn't have nearly the amount of uproar about his contract, right? Similarly, the Severson problem, he's making, 6.5 million for the next 6 seasons. That is a lot of money for a long time for a third pair defenseman, right? The cap going up will help alleviate that. Honestly, the Provorov contract will probably help that, because when you look at it, you're like, well, it could be worse. It could be the Provorov contract, right? But here's the thing about Damon Severson, and I kind of voiced this on Blue Sky near the end-ish of the season, I think. And obviously, Damon Severson didn't have the season that he wanted to, right? He got healthy scratched a bunch. He played not as much as I thought he did, though. He played 70 of 82 games, but it was near the end there. Like, he didn't play for like the last chunk of the season when, the team is in a fight to the playoffs. His last game was April 1st. So, he missed, and that was against Nashville, which I don't believe was even in there was that 6-game winning streak to end the season, right? And he wasn't in any of those games, which I thought was interesting, because Dean Evason, he seems on the surface like a player that Dean Evason would love, right? Good attitude, tries hard, veteran player. Maybe not the most effective, but I don't know that effectiveness is necessarily something that can get you into Dean Evason's good books, which is maybe saying more about Dean Evason than it does about the player. But here's the thing about Damon Severson, to go back to my original point, is he is such a wrong place, wrong time player. And what I mean by that is I've seen a lot of people, trying to figure out if there is advanced stats for the clutch aspect of the game, right? Like Justin Williams, they call him Mr. Game 7 for a reason, right? And you look at players who always show up in big games or in big moments and score that overtime winner or the game tying goal or the game winning goal or whatever it is, right? Like, or they make the big save when they need to, the big defensive play, etc., right? And I think Damon Severson might just be the opposite of clutch. And this is not to say that he's a bad player, right? But I feel like the bad moments with Severson are like big bad, right? He never makes a small mistake. He always makes an extremely loud and obvious mistake that feels like it should have the Benny Hill soundtrack playing to it, right? Like, and that's okay, that's not ideal, right? Like, you don't want your defenseman to be making these kind of huge mistakes as often as he makes them. But I do think that because the mistakes are so like badly timed, let's say, that they stand out more than if, a player like Zach Werenski would make the same mistake, right? It stands out more because I think that Severson doesn't have that timing. And maybe this is like a hockey IQ thing of he just chooses to make the wrong play. When we acquired him, they talked a lot about, well, good offensive defenseman will have probably every other game will have one of the biggest brain farts you have ever seen and just throw the puck to the other team. And it usually ends up going in the net. And we have, in fact, seen like a bunch of that from Severson, right? If it's like his brain just reboots mid-game, which is an extremely frustrating type of player to watch. Again, I don't know that it makes him a bad player because he has like, again, and we'll get into kind of the underlying stats of it, right? But when he's good, he's good. When he's bad, he's really, really bad. And I think it was Aaron Portzline pointed this out, that like you can usually tell which one you get within like the first 5 minutes of a game of like, if he screws up on his first shift, then usually it's like, oh, okay, well, this is the Severson that we're going to get, right? If he has a good first shift, typically that's the Severson that you get. And again, I think it comes down to, I talked about this a little bit on Monday's episode, I think, or something similar to it, right? Of you notice the bad calls more than you notice the good ones, right? And it's the same way of like, you notice the mistakes more than you notice the good things. And Damon Severson is a player that is not always, but sometimes a player that you don't notice unless he screws up, right? Unfortunately, when he screws up, it just happens to be while everyone is looking at him, and like it's like dropping a tray of drinks in a crowded pub immediately after like there's been a weird lull in conversation. You know how sometimes a pub or a bar just goes completely silent for a second as everyone's conversation lulls at the same time? That's when Damon Severson drops his tray of drinks or, turns the puck over to reset this extremely mediocre metaphor that I'm going with here. But like, and I think that is the crux of the Severson problem is people remember the screw ups way more than they remember the good plays, and he has had some good games in Columbus. I think he was a improved player this season. I wasn't going to say much improved, but I don't know. He was definitely an improved player. I think he was better this season than he was last season, but like that's not saying a lot because I think everyone was pretty miserably bad last season. But I think he is a player that will benefit massively from playing extremely sheltered minutes on the third pairing, which I assume is where he's going to be because, the top four is going to be Werenski, Fabro, Matejchuk, Provorov, right? For my money, the third pairing should be Jake Christensen and Damon Severson. I don't know if that's what they'll go with. My guess is they'll probably start with Severson and Gabranson, which feels like an adventure. I thought that Christensen and Severson worked well in the minutes that they played last season. I'm just going to pull up those numbers because they're in a different tab. But it's it's probably going to be Severson Gabranson. Gabranson is a great seventh defenseman. I don't know that he's an everyday player. Like, he shouldn't be in all 82 games this season. Like, he probably won't be. But, to get back to Severson, he is a great third pairing guy that you put out against other third pairing guys and just kind of hope that nothing happens, right? He with Severson, Christensen and Severson were better than Provorov, Severson, and Provorov, Matejchuk. In terms of like expected goals for and against. The Werenski Severson pairing was also not terrible, but like not great. Created a lot, didn't give up a ton, but it comes out in the wash. Is what I was saying here. Like, the Severson Christensen pairing was not an abject disaster. Is kind of my point here. And honestly, that's kind of all I ask for in a third pairing is do not be an abject disaster when you're on the ice, right? So I want to look a little bit more into Severson's underlying stats because his underlying stats tell a very different story to the eye test. And I want to try and figure out why that is a little bit more, beyond the obvious, like, unclutch gene, I think I'm going to call it. So we'll do that in just a second here on Locked On Blue Jackets. First, I'm going to tell you about FanDuel because summer sports are in full swing. Whether you're all about baseball under the lights, golf on the green, or high-stakes soccer action, FanDuel is the best way to make every game even more exciting. You're already following the action, so why not make it even more thrilling? With FanDuel, you can get in on the game while your friends are getting sunburnt at the beach. It's easy to use, it's fast to pay out, and it makes even regular season games feel like must-watch events. Whether I'm placing a same-game parlay or watching a bet ride into the ninth inning, FanDuel makes it feel like I'm part of the action. Are you new to FanDuel? Great news. New customers can bet just $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if your first bet wins. Just find the heaviest favorite you can, throw $5 on it if it comes through. Get $150 in bonus bets that you can spend on whatever you want. Open the FanDuel app today or visit FanDuel.com to get started. Welcome back to Locked On Blue Jackets. We're talking about Damon Severson today, and he has been a player that has vexed many a Blue Jackets fan, right? And I think he kind of got off on... He kind of got in the coach's bad books near the end there, which... on the one hand, I'm kind of surprised it didn't happen faster, and on the other hand, I'm kind of surprised it happened at all, right? Damon Severson is exactly what you think he is. He is a decent puck-moving defenseman that is not terrible in his own zone, creates a lot of offense, and very occasionally his brain will just completely turn off in the middle of the game, right? However, his underlying stats suggest that he is a much more effective defenseman than people would think. And so for this, I'm using mypuck.com. And I'm also using hockeyviz.com, which is Micah Blake McCurdy's advanced stats. And those are the ones that I like. I saw that, I believe it was Jay Fresh on Twitter posted a stat card for Damon Severson that was shockingly positive. I do think a lot of it is that his offense is so good, it balances out the defense. Like, he is, again, according to this, he is 9% better at creating goals for than the average hockey player, and 2% better at allowing fewer expected goals than the average hockey player. So, what this means is he is quite a bit better at creating offense and a little bit better than not allowing offense. Surprisingly good at suppressing offense on the penalty kill as well. Which shocks me because, again, the penalty kill has been a problem for the Blue Jackets for so long, not forever, but so when I looked into this, and I was like, well, let's see what his underlying stats are, because I know that, and I have been loud, let's say, about his on-ice impact. So when I looked into the underlying stats, and I still think that probably what happens is he falls somewhere between the eye test and the advanced stats, right? Because that's how it works. It's not one or the other. but he is his underlying stats, again, shockingly good. Again, a lot of it is that he's very good at creating offense, but he's not as bad at allowing offense as a lot of people, myself included, considered him to be. So, like I said, on the one hand, that's definitely like what that is he is still gonna have those brain farts, and those are gonna end up at the back of the net. And I think it's a combination of that and also shaky question mark goaltending. Like, because that's the other thing as well is a player turns the puck over and it ends up in the back of the net. You're gonna remember that, right? Player turns the puck over, gets bailed out by the goalie. No one ever remembers that, right? Like, again, I was going to use an example for this, and I can't even remember who the defenseman was, which is my point. It was the Vancouver Olympics, and it was the gold medal game for the USA and Canada, and one of the Canadian defensemen just turned the puck over, and an American forward got a complete breakaway on Roberto Luongo. Roberto Luongo saved that Canadian defenseman's entire career. Like, it might have been Jay Bouwmeester, actually. But like the point I'm making here is no one remembers that, because if the puck had gone in, that would have played in every single USA, like Team USA highlight package until the end of time, right? But because Luongo made the save, everyone remembers the save, right? You remember the great save the goalie made, not the turnover from the defenseman that got them there. So I think it's probably a little bit of A, the unclutch gene, B, shaky goaltending, also C, again, just confirmation bias. I feel like, and this is not an attack or like an accusation, because I do it as well. I feel like a lot of Blue Jackets fans expect him to screw up, so when he does, they can point to it and go, yes, see, I was right, he's bad. But then they don't, and again, I have clearly been guilty in this myself, like they don't necessarily pay the same attention to when he makes good plays. Like, again, case in point, I know he had a really good game this season. He had like a 3 or 4 point game this season. Can I remember when it was or who it was against? No. He had a 3 assist game against Chicago on December 1st, right? Played almost 25 minutes, was a +3. Again, three assists. Like, the Blue Jackets won that game handily. His only multi-point game of the season, I believe, but it was a good one, right? Like, and again, I get it. The bad times are bad, but I think because the good times are kind of understated, it really kind of solidifies the bad moments as standing out more. And I do think that, and this is what we'll talk about again in a little bit more detail in the second here, is that, like, yeah, I do think there is a place in the lineup for Damon Severson, if only because the contract's not tradable. They're not going to buy him out and pay him money for the next 12 years. This is not Mike Richards. Like, he is a Blue Jacket. He's going to be a Blue Jacket probably for the rest of the contract, or at least for the next 4 years, right? If the cap goes up enough to make the contract tradable, then they might reconsider. But as of right now, Damon Severson's going to be a Blue Jacket. Like, that contract's not movable right now, and they simply aren't going to buy it out. They're just not going to do that. So he's going to be on the team. Should he be in the lineup? Should he be in the top 6 defensemen? Yes. And we'll talk about that in a little bit more detail in just a second here on Locked On Blue Jackets. Welcome back to Locked On Blue Jackets. We're talking about Damon Severson and how he's maybe not as bad as I think he is, or as bad as some other people think that he is. So we've talked about his underlying stats, we've talked about the eye test, we've talked about the brain reboots that happen what feels like every other game. But here's the thing: Damon Severson, as a defenseman that faces very, very sheltered minutes, should be a much better defenseman than the Damon Severson that we saw in the 23-24 season, where he played a lot. Blue Jackets, again, like, so injured in that season. He ended up playing an average of, what did I say, like 21 minutes a game. He did miss some time with, I believe it was like an oblique injury or an abdominal injury or something. But which I believe was the first, like the most significant time he's missed since basically his rookie season, which I do think is the most Blue Jackets thing of going out and gaining a defenseman that never gets injured and then him getting injured in the first season there. But that's beside the point. He missed about 15 games with this injury and was miserably bad, like the rest of the team, when he was in the lineup. Last season, for the 24-25 season, he played a lot fewer minutes, played more sheltered minutes, got a much more favorable matchup. He wasn't doing the he did not have the big minutes on, the power play. He played what was it, about 1,300 minutes, I believe. He played 1,333 minutes, which is very satisfying. 1,170 of those were at even strength at 5-on-5. He played 38 minutes of power play time and 88 minutes of penalty kill time. Ideal. I would probably have him on the penalty kill more than, let's say an Erik Gudbranson. But if they're only going to play him at 5-on-5, and again, he's going to be in that third pairing role, potentially put him up to second if, knock on wood, someone gets injured. And I assume that they will be because it's the Blue Jackets and people always get injured. He can be a second pairing defenseman if you need him to be, but I do think that the best place for him is the third pair, is with a semi-competent defense partner, which again should be Jake Christensen. I imagine it will be Gudbranson, which I do think that the Severson-Gudbranson pairing is going to be an adventure, mostly because Damon Severson is so offensively minded and Erik Gudbranson is not good at defense. But if they're playing and again, I think they should drop his ice time even lower than what it was last season. Like again, 1903. In terms of Blue Jackets defensemen specifically, it was, I want to say, 4th on the team in total ice time. Drink if you've got it. Locked on Blue Jackets bingo. I closed the tab that I needed. He played the 4th most ice time. So obviously Zach Werenski led the way with 21.66. Ivan Provorov in second with 19.15. Dante Fabro at 14.20, which makes sense because he only played 68 games for the Blue Jackets. And then Severson comes in about 100 onto that at 1,333 minutes in 70 games. Hopefully, this season, he should be playing fewer minutes than Denton Matejchuk. He should probably be playing fewer minutes than Jake Christensen as well. Damon Severson should be your 5 or 6. Jake Christensen played 68 games and 852 minutes, so 500-ish minutes fewer than Damon Severson. I don't know what the average is off the top of my head, and I don't have the tab open to go look it up. But if you're playing 500 minutes less over an 82-game season, or a 70-game season, whatever, if Damon Severson is averaging 16 minutes a game, that feels ideal, right? If you want to put him out on the penalty kill, you can. I wouldn't put him on the power play necessarily. I think he's probably, 4th or 5th in line for power play minutes as a defenseman. Obviously, it's going to be Werenski, and then I assume Matejchuk or Fabro as the second power play unit. Maybe Provorov if they want, although we'll see. That felt ungenerous. To Provorov, who is a fine second unit power play defenseman, I guess. But the point I'm making here is play Damon Severson less, reap the rewards, play him against the other team's third pairing and, fourth line guys. And I think you'll see good results. He's not terrible at suppressing offense, which means that, again, if you put him against a third or a fourth line, that their jobs typically aren't to create a ton of offense. I think you'll probably see a much better Damon Severson. Of course, all of this goes out the window if, knock on wood again, someone gets injured and you have to put Damon Severson into the top 4 for any significant length of time. So I just don't know that he's a top 4 caliber defenseman on this team. I would be intrigued by playing him on the second pairing with Matejchuk, but that would drop Provorov down to the third pairing, and they're not going to do that because of the contract that he's just signed, etc., etc. So again, would be intrigued by it. Don't know how likely it is to happen. I will be interested to see how Evason uses him, because I do think that he got into kind of the doghouse with Evason towards the end of the season there, which is wild because as far as I'm aware, Damon Severson, great guy, extremely well liked in the room, extremely personable, kind of a really chill dude, right? So I can't imagine that he was, ranting and raving and having tantrums about being healthy scratch. I'm sure he wasn't happy, but I can't imagine him making that anyone else's problem, right? So again, we'll see. I think again, training camp is what, about a month away, give or take, 5 weeks away. So we'll see what happens as they kind of get into the swing of things. The good news for Severson is that there's no one really waiting in the wings to take his job. The bad news is we'll have to see again how he responds to those late scratches at the end of last season, because I do think he might be on the outside looking in right now. I genuinely wouldn't be shocked if they start the season with Gabranson and Christensen as that third pairing, just because Everson liked Gabranson, the team likes to have Gabranson in the lineup, and Jay Christensen can play on the left side, which the Blue Jackets have 1.5 defensemen that can play on the left side, which is maybe mean to Denton Matejchuk, but he's still a baby, so I don't know that I'm counting him as a full defenseman now. But my point still stands, right? Of the Blue Jackets have a lot of right-handed defensemen. They don't have a lot of left-handed defensemen. So the left-handed defensemen they do have are probably going to be in the lineup. Or what's going to happen is you're going to have more defensemen playing on their offsides because they want Provorov in the top 4 playing on his offside. If you put Severson and Gabranson out as a pairing together, then one of them is going to have to play their offside. And I think that will also create more problems than it solves, right? So my guess is it's going to be Christensen as that 3 LD, and then one of Gabranson or Severson as the 3 RD. Probably Gabranson, but again, I wouldn't be shocked. I wouldn't be shocked at any combination of those 3. Obviously I have my preferences, but I'll be interested to see what Dean Evason does as they get to kind of the end of the preseason. Your baby defenseman that you've thrown into a couple of games, your Stanislav Sposel, for example, your Luca Morelli will probably get a couple of preseason games of action, to figure out what he's going to do with that third pairing. And here's the thing, if you're worried, if the thing that you're worrying about is the third defense pairing, probably it's not that big of a deal. Obviously, there are other problems in the Blue Jackets lineup. I'm not convinced by the goaltending. I'm not convinced by the top 6. If you're sitting here splitting hairs about who's on the third defense pairing instead of any of those other problems, probably the problem isn't that bad. But we'll see. Again, I think that Damon Severson is probably not as good as the stats say, and not as bad as the eye test says. It falls somewhere in between. If only he could get rid of that part of his brain that just shuts off. Again, it almost feels like it's every 48 hours for 3 seconds. His brain's just nope, and we're back. And then it happens again 48 hours later, and just, almost you can set your watch to it, right? If we can get rid of that, I think he would be an extremely serviceable bottom 4 defenseman. As it stands, I do think that tendency to just throw the puck away once every other game is probably not going to work in his favor ever. If you can get rid of that, and at the end of the day, he's 30 years old, you can't teach an old dog new tricks. I think he is the defenseman that he is. We're not going to magically see a different Damon Severson next season. But I think by limiting his ice time and limiting the difficulty of his matchups, I think you're probably going to get the best Damon Severson that you can, which is not nothing, right? And that's kind of all I've got for today. Tomorrow, we'll be back. We'll do another episode because it's Friday, and why not? And I think what we're going to do is let's take a look at the Metropolitan Division and look at who got better and who got worse and try and figure out where the Blue Jackets fall in the Metro Division. Because the Metro Division is a weird division, and I feel like every team is either going to be great or every team is going to be terrible, by, a couple of exceptions. And there's no way to know until we're 2 weeks into the season. So let's try and figure out what's going on with the Metropolitan Division. Tomorrow's episode. If you haven't already, the top 25 under 25 Blue Jackets poll is live. It's on Twitter, LO_Blue Jacket. I'm going to link to it in the video description down below as well. So if you haven't ranked your top 25 Blue Jackets under the age of 25, please go ahead and do so. We're going to break that down over 3 episodes next week. So Monday, Wednesday, Friday. We'll break down the top 25 under 25 with some honorable mentions involved as well. Shout out to the person who had Jack Greaves ranked number 1 of their top 25 Blue Jackets under 25. I applaud you for going with your heart, because obviously that top 25 under 25 also includes Adam Fantilli and Ken Johnson. So I respect you for picking Jack Greaves. He wouldn't be my number 1 choice, but shout out to that one person. So if that was you, good job. I support you and your opinions. That's it for today. Like I said, tomorrow we'll talk about the Metropolitan Division. You can find me on Twitter at, nope, not anymore. You can find me on Blue Sky at JAKOBFORSTER. You can find the show at LO_Blue Jackets on Twitter. I think I already said that, but we're doing fine. Email me if you have questions, comments, criticisms, lockedonbluejackets@gmail.com. And until tomorrow, make sure you stay locked on.